When my daughter died, her husband inherited the house and $25 million, and then he threw me out, telling me, "You're no longer welcome here. Go die in the gutter." But a few days later, the lawyer let out a laugh and said, "Did you listen carefully to the will?" What was written there made my son-in-law faint from shock. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are. The mahogany casket gleamed under a gray Texas sky that threatened a rain that hadn't yet fallen. 37 people surrounded my daughter's grave, their black clothes making them look like crows perched on the spring grass. In my worn hands, I held Catherine's third-grade school picture, the edges soft from years of being caressed. My little girl was gone, at just 45 years old, and cancer had taken her anyway. Julian stood at the head of the casket, playing the part of the grieving widower to perfection. His designer black suit probably cost more than what many of those present earned in a month. His manicured nails rested on the polished wood as if he owned it, as if he owned everything. The minister was halfway through his sermon on eternal rest when he moved. His dress shoes clicked against the cemetery stones as he approached me, that calculated compassion etched on his face. "Eleanor," he whispered, but loud enough for Mrs. Henderson and the Johnsons to hear. His perfectly cared-for hand touched my arm. "I hope you don't think you'll be staying in my house after this." The words hit me like ice water. Some of the attendees shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to have heard, but everyone had. I gripped Kate's photo tighter, feeling the tension in my jaw. "That's my daughter's house, Julian." "It was your daughter's house," he replied with that poisoned sweetness he mastered so well. "It's mine now." Catherine left everything to her loving husband. Mrs. Henderson let out a small gasp from behind her glove. Obie Smith took a step forward, his weathered face hardening. These people had known Catherine since she was just a child. They had watched her build her construction empire from the ground up. "We haven't heard the reading of the will yet," I said softly, trying to stay calm despite the fire burning in my chest. Julian laughed. "Yes, he laughed at my daughter's funeral. What is there to hear? I'm her husband. Who else was she going to leave millions to?" The minister paused mid-sentence, visibly uncomfortable. Everyone was watching now, some averting their eyes in embarrassment. This moment was supposed to be about Catherine, about honoring her memory. But this man was turning it into his personal show. "The deceased was a generous woman," the minister continued, trying to regain control of the ceremony. "A pillar of our community, someone who knew how to take care of her family." "Her real family," Julian interrupted, smiling at me with those cold blue eyes. Then I understood. It wasn't grief speaking, or even greed. It was strategy. He had planned this moment, chosen this public stage where I couldn't react as my blood demanded, where he could impose his narrative in front of witnesses. The minister finished his prayer as the first clumps of dirt began to fall on Catherine's casket. Each shovelful was another piece of my heart breaking. But Julian's triumphant smile, that smirk etched on his face as he looked at me, burned into my memory. He returned to his performance of the devastated widower, receiving condolences from people who had known Catherine since she was a little girl, faking his sorrow while my real grief was cast aside, treated like old news. As they lowered my daughter into the Texas earth, I made myself a promise. Whatever game Julian thought he was playing, he had chosen the wrong opponent. The rain finally began to fall with the last shovelful of dirt. As the crowd dispersed toward their cars, I stayed behind. The gravediggers had finished their work, and the temporary cross stood crooked in the fresh earth. I placed my single red rose on the mound, the same variety my late husband used to grow in our garden 30 years ago. Julian's laughter carried from the other side of the cemetery, surrounded by a group of mourners, probably telling them his story of the poor widower and his burdens. The wind tossed my gray hair, and the arthritis in my hands flared up again as I looked at that school photo, Catherine at 8 years old, with her crooked smile and that rebellious lock of hair that never wanted to stay put. When had that bright-eyed little girl become the woman with sunken cheeks I visited at the Houston Hospital in March of 2023, MD Anderson Cancer Center? The smell of disinfectant couldn't hide the fear that hung in the air. Catherine had already lost 40 pounds, her expensive suits hanging loosely on an increasingly fragile frame. The experimental treatments weren't working, but she kept fighting, always fighting. "Mom, I want you to know I made sure you'd be taken care of," she told me that day, squeezing my hand with fingers as frail as a bird's bones. "No matter what happens, you'll be protected." At the time, I didn't understand. I thought she was talking about life insurance, maybe a savings account. Catherine had always been responsible, even as a child, saving coins in glass jars. But watching her fight those last few months, I noticed something else. Fear. Not fear of dying. My daughter was never afraid of much. It was a fear of leaving things unfinished, of leaving people unprotected. The memory took me back 20 years. Catherine, at 25, standing in what would be her first office, a rented space above Murphy's hardware store, with a folding table for a desk and dreams bigger than Texas itself. "I'll never be poor like we were, Mom," she promised me, working 16-hour days to turn a $5,000 loan into something real, building subdivisions across 3 counties, creating jobs, making families happy and homes her company built. Success came quickly. Her first million at 35, 10 million by 40, but she never stopped. Catherine pushed herself like a woman possessed, chasing something I never fully understood, maybe running from the memories of government cheese, of secondhand clothes, and of watching me count out pennies at the grocery store. The photo trembled in my arthritic hands. I remembered that last coherent conversation, 3 days before the end. Her voice was barely a whisper, but her words were sharp with urgency. "He's not who I thought he was, Mom. Julian." I figured it out too late. "Honey, you're tired. It's the medicine. The will. I made sure you're protected. Promise me you'll fight if you have to." I promised, not knowing what I was promising. I assumed it was delirium from the medication or the paranoia that comes with pain. Catherine died believing I understood, and I had failed her in that final moment. Now, standing by her grave while her husband celebrated 50 yards away, those words sounded like a prophecy. The money hadn't saved her. Years of work, of sacrifice, of accumulating wealth, and cancer took her anyway. The cruel irony burned hotter than Julian's threats. But Catherine had been smarter than her old mother had thought. In those final months, while she was fighting for her life, she had also been fighting for mine. I tucked the photograph into my jacket pocket as Julian's voice carried over from the distance. "Well, it's time to discuss practical matters." He was coming toward me with his entourage of witnesses, likely planning another public humiliation. I clutched the school picture tightly, feeling its soft edges dig into my palm. Whatever Catherine had planned, I was going to need it soon. The rain was falling harder now, and Julian's designer shoes must have been sinking into the mud. Good. Let him at least deal with something, even if it was just walking on wet grass. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked toward my old Ford pickup. All around me, car doors slammed, engines started, people eager to escape the discomfort Julian had created at the burial. He intercepted me halfway to my truck, his designer dress shoes marking each step on the wet pavement. Mrs. Henderson, Joe from the First National Bank, and 3 other mourners flanked him like a jury he had assembled himself. Strategic positioning. I recognized it from my days as a military wife. "Eleanor, you need to understand the reality of the situation." Julian planted himself directly in my path, those cold blue eyes locked on mine. Catherine left me everything. The house, the business, the investments, all of it. His certainty was absolute. It wasn't a bluff or a wish. He knew something the rest of us didn't, and he was relishing the reveal. I kept my voice flat, like you do with a spooked horse. "We haven't heard the will yet, Julian. And what's there to hear? I'm her husband." His laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Did you really think she'd leave millions to someone who never contributed a dime to her success?" The witnesses shifted uncomfortably. Joe cleared his throat and studied his shoes. Mrs. Henderson clutched her purse tighter, clearly wishing she were anywhere else, but they stayed. That was the point of this little piece of theater, to create witnesses to his dominance, to establish the narrative before anyone could question it. "I know this is difficult," he continued, tilting his head with rehearsed sympathy, "but you can't live in denial. Catherine loved you, but she was practical. She knew I would need everything to maintain the lifestyle she built for us." The cruelty was breathtaking. Not just the words, but the timing, The public stage, the witnesses he had gathered to watch my humiliation. That man had studied pain the way others study recipes. "Everything all right here, Eleanor?" Obie Smith approached from where his old Chevy was parked, reading the tension like he read the weather. At 68, Obie was still built like the farmer he'd been, with hands that could calm a frightened horse or stop a charging bull. 30 years of friendship had taught him to spot trouble, and Julian was trouble wrapped in a designer suit. "We're just discussing practical matters," Julian said, a flash of irritation showing before the mask was back in place. "Practical matters can wait," Obie said quietly, positioning himself slightly between us. "A woman deserves time to mourn her daughter." "Of course, she does." Julian's smile was pure steel. "That's precisely why I'm inviting everyone back to the house for a drink. A proper memorial gathering." This was news to me. Catherine would have wanted something simple, quiet, but Julian was rewriting her story in real time, casting himself as the generous host instead of the vulture picking at the bones. "That sounds lovely," Mrs. Henderson said, clearly relieved to have something normal to focus on. Catherine would have liked that. The others murmured their agreement, accepting the invitation without question. Julian's smile widened as he saw them fall in line, solidifying his role as the proper host of Catherine's memory. "You'll come too, won't you, Eleanor?" His tone was silk over steel. "It's important for family to be present." Family! The word was an insult wrapped in politeness, spoken in front of people who had known me since before Catherine was born. He was daring me to refuse, to make myself look petty and difficult in front of the community. "Something doesn't smell right here," Obie muttered, stepping closer so only I could hear. His farmer's instincts were sharper than most people gave him credit for, but the others were already walking to their cars, talking about what dishes they might bring, and how Catherine would have loved to see everyone together. Julian had successfully hijacked my daughter's memory, turning her funeral into his coronation. "See you at the house," he said, triumph shining in his blue eyes. "After all, it's still your daughter's house." For now. The emphasis on "for now" was deliberate. Another small cruelty applied with surgical precision. He got into Catherine's Mercedes, his Mercedes now, and drove off, leading the caravan of mourners to what had been my home for the last 3 years. I stood in the cemetery parking lot, the rain soaking through my jacket, watching the taillights disappear down the main road. The funeral was over, but something else was just beginning. Obie waited by his truck, the engine running but not moving. "You comin', old friend?" I looked one last time at Catherine's grave and then got into my pickup. Whatever Julian had planned for this memorial gathering, I wasn't going to face it alone. The 15-minute drive to the house felt like heading into battle, which I suppose it was. The cars pulled into the circular driveway one after another, gravel crunching under the tires as they arrived at the Wells family home. Julian, of course, had beaten us there. His Mercedes was already parked in the front spot, right by the porch steps. He got out before many had even turned off their engines, suddenly energetic in a way that made my skin crawl. "Please, everyone, come in for a drink." His voice projected theatrically across the driveway. "I've prepared a proper memorial for Catherine." I got out of Obie's truck carefully, my arthritic joints protesting after the long day. Something was wrong with all of this. We hadn't planned any gathering. In fact, Catherine would have hated all the fuss. "Since when did he plan a memorial?" Obie muttered, matching his pace to mine as we walked toward the house. The Victorian mansion looked the same as always. White columns, a wraparound porch, the climbing roses my late husband had planted 40 years ago. But Julian stood on those front steps as if he owned every brick and board, which, from the looks of it, he probably did. Mrs. Henderson raised her eyebrows as we approached. "Eleanor, dear, did you know about this gathering?" "No, ma'am. This is a surprise to me." Julian heard us and gave us that practiced smile. "I wanted Catherine's friends to have a proper chance to remember her. Surely you won't object to honoring your daughter's memory." Phrased like that, any objection sounded selfish. He was clever, my son-in-law. A snake oil salesman's kind of clever, but clever nonetheless. We stepped into the house I had called home for 3 years, the place where Catherine was born, where her father had died, where 3 generations of the Wells family had lived, worked, and loved. Now it belonged to someone who had known Catherine for less than 2 years. That's when I noticed the setup. Tables had been set in the dining room, covered with white linens I'd never seen before. The fine china was laid out, not the everyday dishes, but the wedding set that had been my own. Wine glasses glittered under the chandelier, and expensive bottles were already open, breathing. This level of preparation doesn't happen in the hour between the funeral and now. He planned this, I whispered to Obi as we hung our coats in the foyer. Before the funeral was even over, he agreed, his farmer's eyes taking in every detail. Look at those flowers. Those aren't from the grocery store. Someone ordered those days ago. Julian moved through the rooms like a natural host, guiding people into the living room, offering drinks, discussing the wine selection with authority. Every gesture screamed ownership, possession, control. Make yourselves comfortable, he said, gesturing to Catherine's favorite armchair, the leather recliner where she had spent her last few months when the treatments left her too weak to work. I'll get you all something to drink. Joe from the bank accepted a glass of red that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Very thoughtful of you, Julian. Did you arrange all of this today? Catherine always said hospitality was important. He poured himself a generous glass, his hands as steady as a surgeon's. She would have wanted her friends to remember this day properly. Remember it properly, as if the funeral hadn't been enough. As if he needed to stamp his ownership on Catherine's memory as well. The doorbell rang, cutting through the murmur of conversation. Julian's eyes lit up, and he practically sprang toward the door. That must be Mr. Thompson, he announced to the room, barely containing his excitement. Now we can take care of the formal business. Jasper Thompson entered, carrying his briefcase of official documents, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes sought me out as he crossed the room. Something flickered there, a look I couldn't read, but it made my pulse quicken. The real business was about to begin. 23 people settled into the living room, finding spots on sofas, chairs, and wherever they could. The solemn atmosphere felt heavy, like tomb air. Thompson positioned himself near the fireplace and, with rehearsed efficiency, pulled documents from his leather briefcase. Julian claimed the wingback chair closest to the lawyer, smoothing his black suit and adjusting his pearl tie pin. I took the chair in the corner by the window, the same spot where I had spent countless afternoons watching Catherine work on her laptop. I will now read the last will and testament of Catherine Michelle Wells, Thompson began, his voice filled with legal authority. The room fell completely silent, except for the soft rustle of papers. Dated February 10th, 2025. Signed before witnesses and notarized in accordance with the laws of the state of Texas. Julian's foot began to tap on the oriental rug. His fingers drummed on the arm of the chair. He could barely contain himself. Thompson continued with the standard legal language. A declaration of sound mind, revocation of previous wills, appointment of an executor, the boring part that made Mrs. Henderson shift in her seat and Joe glance at his watch. To my loyal employees at Wells Construction, I leave an additional month's salary, to be distributed equally among all current staff, Thompson read in a firm, professional voice. To my cousin Sarah in Houston, I leave my mother's jewelry collection. To the Willow Creek Public Library, I leave $50,000 for the renovation of the children's section. Small bequests, charitable donations, personal items distributed among various relatives. Standard stuff for any will, which only made Julian's impatience more obvious. So, when do we get to the important part? He whispered in a stage voice, loud enough for half the room to hear. Thompson cleared his throat and turned to a new page. The air in the room was held like a single breath. To my beloved husband, Julian Michael Wells, I leave the family home located at 847 Magnolia Street, along with all its contents, and the sum of $25 million from my investment accounts. Julian shot up from his chair, as if launched by a spring. I knew it. I knew Catherine would take proper care of me. The reactions were mixed. Some smiled politely. Others were made uncomfortable by his enthusiasm. Mrs. Henderson exchanged a meaningful look with her husband. Even in grief, most people respected certain social boundaries. I gripped the arms of my chair, feeling the grain of the wood press into my palms. $25 million plus the house. Catherine had been generous with her husband. I had to give him that. I swallowed hard, hating that I had to ask. And me? What do I receive? Thompson's eyes found mine across the room. Something passed between us, a silent message in that look. To my mother, Eleanor Samuel Wells, I leave all personal keepsakes, family photographs, and her tools from the workshop. The silence stretched like melted taffy. Tools and photographs. After helping to build Catherine's empire, after 3 years living under that roof, after a lifetime of love and sacrifice, tools and photographs, Julian's smile could have lit up the entire county. He turned to the room like a king addressing his subjects, accepting congratulations from neighbors who had known Catherine since she was in diapers. Catherine always said she would take care of me, he proclaimed, his voice vibrant with triumph. She was such a thoughtful wife. Well, dear, you're certainly set for life now, Mrs. Henderson nodded politely. More than set, Julian laughed sharply. I'll never have to worry about a thing again. I remained seated, watching the performance with a clarity that only grief can provide. That man had never loved my daughter. He had seen a price tag, a lifestyle, a fortune to inherit, and Catherine, my brilliant Catherine, had figured it out too late. But as the congratulations continued and glasses clinked, Thompson looked at me again. He was putting his documents away, but his movements were deliberately slow. When our eyes met, he gave a slight nod toward the kitchen. There is an additional clause, he said quietly, his voice nearly lost in the noise. But it requires a private discussion. Julian was too busy receiving praise to notice. But I heard him, and for the first time since the funeral, something like hope began to stir in my chest. The formal reading was over, but it seemed the real business was just beginning. The guests moved from the living room, drawn by the elaborate spread that Julian had mysteriously arranged. Crystal glasses caught the evening light filtering through the tall windows, and silverware gleamed on white tablecloths. This wasn't thrown together in an afternoon. This was orchestrated. Julian raised his glass high, calling for silence like a conductor. To Catherine, who always took care of those she loved most, the irony wasn't lost on me, though it flew over everyone else's heads. He had just inherited $25 million, while I received a toolbox and some family photos. Catherine's definition of loved most seemed to have some interesting nuances. This wine is exceptional, Dr. Miller commented, swirling the Bordeaux in his glass. What vintage is it, Julian? A 2012 Bordeaux. Catherine always said life is too short to drink cheap wine. He moved through the room with a fluid grace, playing the host as if he were to the manor born. I wanted her friends to remember this day properly, he said with a flawless smile. Mrs. Henderson accepted a delicate crystal glass, now looking at him with renewed interest. And you managed to put all of this together today? After the funeral and everything. When you love someone, you find the strength, Julian replied with a catalog-perfect smile. Catherine would have wanted us to celebrate her life, not just mourn her death. Celebrate. An interesting word for a funeral gathering. Most people called them memorial services, but Julian seemed intent on turning Catherine's death into his personal triumph. You know, he said, settling next to Mrs. Henderson on the velvet sofa, I've always wanted to modernize this house, open up some walls, renovate the kitchen. Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows arched slightly. But dear, it's a historic home. It's been in the Wells family for 3 generations. Well, it's my family now, Julian laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Frankly, all this dark wood and heavy furniture is so dreary. I'm thinking light colors, modern furniture, maybe knock out that wall between the kitchen and dining room. My knuckles turned white around my glass. That house had been in our family since 1923. My grandfather built those walls with his own hands, chose every piece of molding, planned every room. Catherine had been born in the upstairs bedroom, had taken her first steps on those floors, but Julian just saw dollar signs and design opportunities. Joe from the bank leaned forward with professional interest. Do you have plans to stay in Willow Creek long-term, or are you thinking of relocating? Julian's eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. Actually, I'm considering selling and moving somewhere more cosmopolitan. Dallas, maybe, or even New York. The room went cold. These people had known Catherine her whole life, had watched her build her business here, create jobs for their children, support local charities. The idea of selling the family home to fund Julian's urban adventures landed like a lead balloon. Catherine loved this house, I said quietly. She was born here. Julian turned to me with theatrical surprise, as if he had forgotten I was in the room. Catherine is dead, Eleanor. It's time to live for the living, don't you think? The mask fell away completely. There was no grieving widower, no thoughtful host. Just cold calculation wrapped in designer clothes. Besides, he continued, warming to his speech, what's the point of maintaining a museum when you can have millions in cash? I could travel, buy a penthouse, really live for the first time in years. Obi moved a little closer, his face set like granite. I could feel him fighting the urge to say something that would get us thrown out on our ears. Mrs. Henderson started gathering her purse, clearly uncomfortable with where the conversation was heading. Well, I really must be going. I have an early day tomorrow. The others followed her lead, making excuses and heading for the door. Within 20 minutes, Catherine's memorial reception had dissolved like smoke in the wind. People who had planned to stay all evening suddenly remembered urgent appointments. I remained in my corner chair, watching the stampede with interest. Julian had managed to alienate Catherine's entire social circle in a single evening. These people came to honor my daughter's memory, and instead, they got a front-row seat to her widower's greed. By 8 o'clock in the evening, only Obi and I remained. Julian stood in the now silent dining room, looking at the abandoned glasses and half-eaten appetizers with a flicker of confusion. Well, I suppose people have busy lives, he said, though for the first time all day, a hint of doubt crossed his face. Obi squeezed my shoulder as he headed for the door. Call me if you need anything, old friend. And I mean it. Anything at all. The front door closed with a solid thud, leaving Julian and me alone in the house that had been my home for 3 years. He turned to me with renewed confidence, clearly relieved to be done with the public performance. Finally, he said, kicking off his expensive shoes. Now we can discuss your situation properly. The sound of engines faded into the distance, leaving only the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall. Julian moved around the kitchen as if he'd lived there his whole life, humming an unfamiliar tune as he stacked dirty plates with practiced efficiency. Well, that went better than I expected, he said, not looking at me, as he scraped the remains of the appetizers into the garbage disposal. His jewelry caught the overhead light diamond cufflinks that probably cost more than anyone's monthly mortgage payment. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for 3 years, watching this performance with a growing fascination. The man moved with complete familiarity, opening cabinets as if he'd memorized their contents, finding the good dish soap without having to look. Julian, we need to talk about what's next. He didn't turn around. He continued loading the dishwasher with mechanical precision. What's next? That's simple. When he finally faced me, his expression had hardened into something colder, more calculated. The mask of the grieving widower was gone completely, replaced by a ruthless business efficiency. What's next is you pack your things and find somewhere else to live. The words hit me like fists, even though I'd been expecting them. This house has been in my family for 4 generations. It was in your family, he snapped, flicking a dish towel with a sharp crack. Now it's legally mine. Catherine left me everything, remember? My hands lay flat on the worn wooden table, steady despite the fire in my chest. 3 generations of Wells women had sat at this very table, planned their days, shared their meals, raised their children. Catherine told me you'd have a hard time accepting reality, Julian continued, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. She said you'd probably expect to live here forever, like some kind of charity case. My daughter never said that to me. Of course she didn't. His laugh was as sharp as breaking glass. She was too polite to hurt your feelings, but she told me plenty. He pushed off the counter and began to pace the kitchen like a lawyer before a jury. She said you'd been depending on her for too long, that it wasn't healthy for a grown woman to need her daughter's support at your age. Lies. Every word was fabricated poison, but he delivered it with such confidence that anyone who didn't know Catherine might have believed him. Look, I get it. Change is hard for older people. His tone shifted to one of false compassion. But you need to understand a fundamental point. This house is mine now, legally, completely. The deed, the mortgage, the property taxes, everything. The deed will have Catherine's name on it, But this land belonged to my grandmother before Catherine was even born. Your grandmother didn't leave you anything, did she? He stopped to face me head on. Accept the facts, Eleanor. You're a charity case who's worn out her welcome. The cruelty was astounding, but what struck me most was how much he was enjoying it. This wasn't just about property or money. He was savoring my apparent helplessness like it was expensive wine. I want you out of here by tomorrow morning, he said, his voice rising with each word. And you will take only what you can carry. No furniture, no family heirlooms, nothing that belongs in this house. I stood up slowly. The arthritis made the movement deliberate and careful. Tomorrow morning, he repeated, and don't even think about trying to claim something originally belonged to your family. I have lawyers, Eleanor. Good ones. They will tie you up in court until the day you die. For the first time since Catherine's funeral, I felt something like a smile pull at the corner of my mouth. As you say, Julian, the unexpected calm in my voice seemed to take him by surprise. He had been building up to an explosion, expecting fury, tears, or desperate pleas. Instead, he got quiet acceptance. We walked out of the kitchen and into the dining room, past the mahogany table where Catherine did her homework as a child, and into the main living room where family portraits lined the fireplace mantel. Julian followed me with a predatory energy, clearly emboldened by what he saw as a total victory. I've been patient with you, Eleanor, but my patience has its limits, he said as he walked around the room, touching the furniture possessively, the antique sofa, the carved end tables, even the brass lamp that had belonged to Catherine's grandmother. This sofa, these antiques, even that hideous family portrait. It's all mine now. Catherine picked out every piece with care, I said quietly, remembering how she spent months looking for the perfect coffee table to match her father's vision for the room. Catherine's taste was as outdated as yours. His fingers slid over the surfaces like an appraiser. For the renovation, I'm thinking modern minimalism, maybe Scandinavian. Clean lines, light colors, no clutter. He was already erasing Catherine's memory, ready to gut everything that connected this house to its history. Here's what's going to happen, he continued, turning to me with theatrical authority. You are going to take your clothes, your medications, and you are going to leave. Nothing else belongs to you. And where exactly do you expect me to go? He shrugged, a casual, devastating gesture. Not my problem. The senior center, a trailer park, maybe that friend of yours? What's his name, OB? Maybe he'll let you sleep in his barn. I'm 65 years old, Julian. I've lived in this county my whole life. Then you should have planned for your retirement better. His smile was a razor blade. Maybe if you'd been a better mother, Catherine would have left you something real, instead of a box of rusty tools. The attack on my relationship with Catherine hurt more than anything else he had said. But before I could answer, he pressed on. Catherine was a good daughter. She loved her family. Enough! The word exploded out of him with unexpected violence. I am sick of hearing about Catherine and her wonderful family and her precious memories. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. It's over. And you know what? I'm glad. He was shouting now, his perfect hair coming undone, his polished facade cracking with fury. I can finally live my life without pretending to care about this boring town, these boring people, and these boring family traditions. The confession hung in the air like smoke from a fire. He had never loved Catherine. He had never loved any part of the life she built, the community she served, the family she cared for. Get out of my sight, he spat, his voice pure venom. Go die in a gutter where you belong. Instead of the rage he expected, I felt something very close to peace settle over me. Whatever you say, Julian. His eyes widened in bewilderment. What? You're not going to argue, beg, give one of those pathetic speeches about family loyalty? No. I allowed myself a small smile. I'll just get my things. You're just giving up? He seemed genuinely stunned by my calm acceptance. I'm respecting your wishes. You are, after all, the legal owner of this house. Why are you being so? He searched for the word. So compliant. What would be the point in fighting? I headed for the stairs with deliberate dignity. You've made your position perfectly clear. He stood in the living room, watching me with a mixture of suspicion and confusion. It wasn't the reaction he expected, or the one he wanted. Crushing someone is only satisfying if they fight back. I'll need about an hour to pack the essentials, I said from the bottom of the stairs. Take what you can fit in 2 suitcases. Nothing more. That seems fair. I walked up slowly, feeling his gaze fixed on my back. I paused at the top and looked down at him. Will you be staying up to supervise? I'll be right here. Don't try anything clever. I let out a small, genuine laugh. At my age, what could I possibly try? As I disappeared down the upstairs hall, I heard him pacing below, his shoes clicking on the hardwood. He had gotten everything he wanted, but something about my reaction was unsettling him. Good. Let him stew in his doubt. I left the Wells house at 6 o'clock in the morning, driving my old Ford pickup with everything I owned packed into 2 battered suitcases. The sun was just breaking over the Texas horizon, painting the sky the color of a freshly cut peach, as I pulled into the parking lot of the roadside motel on Interstate 35. 43 years in that Victorian mansion, and it all came down to this: a 12 by 12 motel room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale cigarettes. The polyester bedspread felt rough under my hands as I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at my one open suitcase. Everything I now owned, 3 changes of clothes, my medications, the 3rd-grade photo of Catherine, and the pocket watch that had belonged to my husband. It wasn't much for 65 years of life, but it would have to do. 18-wheelers rumbled down the highway, shaking the thin walls. The morning traffic was picking up, people heading to their jobs, running errands, living their normal lives, while mine had been turned upside down in 24 hours. Catherine, I said to her photograph, I hope you knew this day might come. The motel coffee pot gurgled, filling the room with the scent of cheap coffee and hard water. I sat at the small table by the window, watching the stream of cars as I methodically reviewed my situation. Homeless at 65. No income beyond Social Security. No family, except for a man who had told me to go die in a gutter. But something had been nagging at me since yesterday, since the will reading, the significant look Jasper Thompson gave me when he mentioned that additional clause. The way he had motioned me toward the kitchen in the middle of the celebration. His professional demeanor was hiding something that felt almost like anticipation. Catherine had been the smartest person I ever knew. She built an empire from nothing. She outmaneuvered competitors twice her size, always 3 steps ahead of everyone. Was it really possible that she would leave her mother defenseless against a man she had grown to distrust? I found Thompson's business card in my wallet and dialed his office number. My hands were steady. A clear purpose was replacing the grief and confusion that had clouded my judgment. Thompson Legal Services. This is Jasper. Jasper, it's Eleanor Wells. I need to talk to you. His tone changed immediately. Professional courtesy gave way to concern. Eleanor, where are you? I heard Julian insisted you leave the house right away. He threw me out last night, told me to go die in a gutter, among other things. A sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. He what? Yesterday you mentioned an additional clause in Catherine's will. I think it's time we discussed it. The pause on the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then Thompson's voice returned, laced with something that sounded remarkably like relief. Yes. Yes, it most certainly is time. Can you see me this morning? Can you get to my office? Let's say 10 o'clock. I'm at the roadside inn off I-35. I can be there in 20 minutes. Eleanor, his voice carried a weight I couldn't identify. Bring everything Julian said to you last night. Every cruel word, every threat, every insult. Write it down if you need to. Why? What difference does it make now? Because Catherine anticipated this exact situation. There was satisfaction in his tone now. Your daughter was even smarter than you thought. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? 10 o'clock. And, Eleanor? You might want to bring a change of clothes for coming back to town. Something nice for when we go visit Julian. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone with the first real hope I'd felt since Catherine's diagnosis. Whatever my daughter had planned, whatever protection she had woven into her will, it was about to be revealed. I took a shower, put on my cleanest blouse, and prepared to find out just how well Catherine had known the man she married. I arrived at Thompson's office at exactly 10 o'clock, parking my old pickup next to his familiar sedan. Downtown Willow Creek looked the same as always. Brick storefronts, American flags hanging heavy in the still morning air, people going about their Tuesday routines as if my world hadn't just fallen apart. Thompson's office was on the second floor of the old Merchants Building. Wood-paneled walls, shelves filled with law books and family photos. A portrait of Catherine hung behind his desk, a formal shot from when she received the county's Business Leader Award just 3 years ago. "Eleanor, you look tired," Thompson said, rising from his desk, genuine concern etched into the lines of his weathered face. "How are you holding up in that motel? I've had better accommodations, but I'm managing." I settled into the leather chair across from him, noticing he seemed almost energetic for so early in the day. "You look pretty pleased about something, Jasper." His smile was the widest I'd seen on him since Catherine's diagnosis. "Eleanor, tell me, did you listen carefully to every word of the will reading yesterday?" "What do you mean?" "Julian got everything. The house, the money, the business. I got Catherine's old tools and some photos. That's what everyone thought they heard." Thompson walked to the office safe, spun the combination with practiced skill, and removed a thick manila folder, handling it like it was treasure. But sometimes, the most important words are the ones nobody pays attention to. "Your daughter was far more clever than Julian ever imagined." My pulse hammered as he laid the full will out on the desk. The pages spread like a map to salvation. "Jasper, what haven't you told me?" Catherine knew exactly what kind of person she had married. His finger came down on the bottom of page 3. "Look here. Section 15B. The fine print everyone missed." I leaned forward, squinting at the legal text. The words took a moment to focus, but when they did, my heart nearly stopped. "Read it aloud, Eleanor. The house and monetary assets are transferred to my husband, Julian Michael Wells." I paused, processing the next phrase. "On the condition that he provide proper care and dignified housing for my mother, Eleanor Samuel Wells, until her natural death." The room was silent, except for the ticking of Thompson's desk clock. "Keep reading," he said quietly. "Should this condition be violated through eviction, verbal abuse, or failure to provide respectful treatment, the entire inheritance shall be immediately transferred to the Catherine Wells Cancer Research Foundation." My hands were shaking. "Jasper, he threw me out. He told me to go die in a gutter." "I know." His satisfaction was unmistakable. Catherine anticipated this exact scenario. How on earth could she know what he would say to me? "Because your daughter instructed me to monitor the situation closely. She told me, Mom is going to need protection, and I won't be there to give it to her." Thompson pulled out another document, a sheet of legal definitions. "The will specifies that proper care means dignified housing, respectful treatment, and familial consideration. Julian violated all 3 conditions in less than 36 hours. I felt tears welling up behind my eyes. Grief, relief, and an overwhelming pride in my daughter's wisdom all swirled together. She knew he would do this to me. "She loved you more than her own comfort, Eleanor." She said, "Mom deserves more than I can give her while I'm fighting this cancer, but I can make sure she gets what she needs when I'm gone." The weight of her words hit me like a physical blow. While she was fighting for her life, Catherine had also been fighting for mine. She had seen through Julian's act, anticipated his cruelty, and built a legal fortress around me. "So what happens now?" I asked, dabbing my eyes with a handkerchief I'd carried for 40 years. Thompson was already gathering official papers, stamping documents with his notary seal. "Now, we inform Mr. Wells of his legal situation. The inheritance became null and void as of last night. When do we tell him?" "This afternoon. Are you ready to face him again?" I straightened my shoulders, feeling a strength return to me that I hadn't had in days. Catherine's love was still protecting me, still fighting for me even from the grave, more ready than I've been since this whole nightmare started. We spent the lunch hour preparing copies of the full will and the transfer documents. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we were in his sedan, heading for the Wells house, the official papers arranged in manila folders on the back seat. The Victorian home looked different as we pulled up the circular driveway, maybe because I knew now that it had never truly belonged to Julian, despite what the abbreviated reading a day earlier had suggested. Thompson rang the doorbell while I stood a step behind him, clutching the folder of documents. The sound of dress shoes on hardwood announced Julian's arrival. "I'm not expecting anyone," he yelled from inside. When he opened the door, he was in casual clothes designer jeans, a silk shirt, his hair styled as if he were getting ready to go out for the evening. Seeing me on what he considered his doorstep ignited his fury immediately. "What are you doing here? I told you to never come back to this house." "Julian, we brought something interesting for you," I said calmly. Thompson stepped forward with professional authority. "Mr. Wells, we need to discuss your wife's will. There are aspects you may have overlooked. The will was read yesterday. It's all settled. You two are trespassing on my property. Actually, sir, you'll want to review the full document before you make that claim." Thompson held out the official copy to him. Multiple pages, legal letterhead, embossed seals, all of it clearly authentic. He snatched it suspiciously. "And what is this supposed to be?" "The complete version of Catherine Wells's last will and testament," I answered. "Not the abbreviated reading you heard yesterday." Julian scanned the first 2 pages, recognizing the same charitable bequests and personal donations. His confusion grew as he saw that everything matched what he remembered. "This looks the same as what was read before." "Keep reading," Thompson said calmly. "Page 3, Section 15B. I watched him closely as he found the section. His face went from confusion to disbelief, and then to panic. His hands were trembling as he read Catherine's protection clause. "This is fake," he yelled, spitting the words out. "This clause wasn't in the original will." "You didn't hear the full reading yesterday," I replied. "You were too busy planning your celebration. You forged this. You added this section after Catherine died." Thompson's voice remained professional and calm. "Sir, I assure you, this document is completely authentic. The original is in my office safe, signed, and notarized in accordance with the laws of the state of Texas. I want to see the original. This is fraud. This is impossible." He examined every page frantically, searching for any sign of alteration, any detail to support his desperation. But Thompson was meticulous. Every seal was authentic, every signature verified, every legal detail flawless. "Proper care and dignified housing for my mother," he read softly, as if it were just beginning to sink in. "You violated that condition approximately 36 hours ago," Thompson informed him, "when you evicted Mrs. Wells and told her, and I quote, to go die in a gutter. This can't be legal. There has to be a mistake, a loophole." I took a step forward, feeling Catherine's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. "There's no mistake, Julian. My daughter knew exactly who you were." He looked from me to Thompson, calculation and comprehension finally dawning in those cold blue eyes. The legal trap had been set months before Catherine even died. "She planned this?" he whispered. "She planned all of this from the beginning." "Perhaps we should discuss the legal implications inside," Thompson suggested. "We are in a neighborhood, after all." Julian nodded mechanically, stepping back. Yes, come in." As I crossed the threshold into what had been my home for 3 years, I couldn't help but notice how quickly the power dynamic had shifted. Yesterday, Julian was the proud owner. Today, he was about to find out that ownership was a lot more complicated than he had imagined. We gathered in the same living room where the will had been read the day before, but everything felt different. Julian collapsed into the armchair he had claimed as his throne, while Thompson and I stood near Catherine's portrait on the mantel. "Mr. Wells, according to Section 15B of your wife's will, you have violated the conditions of the inheritance." Thompson's voice had the finality of a judge's sentence. "The entirety of the inheritance, house, and assets now passes to the Catherine Wells Cancer Research Foundation." "This can't be happening," Julian muttered, his face in his hands. "This can't really be happening. By evicting Mrs. Wells and telling her to die in a gutter, you voided your claim to the inheritance. The will specifically requires dignified treatment and respectful housing." "But I didn't mean it. I was angry. People say things when they're angry." Thompson consulted his notes. "The document specifies that verbal abuse constitutes grounds for forfeiture. Intent is irrelevant under Texas law." I settled into Catherine's old armchair, The same leather one where she'd spent her last months when the treatments left her too weak to work. The irony was not lost on me. Yesterday, I was homeless. Today, I was back home. Now we need to discuss the living arrangements, I said quietly. Julian looked up, his expression a mix of confusion and desperation. What do you mean? This was always the Wells family home. I pointed to the family portraits on the mantel. The foundation has agreed that I will remain here as a lifetime resident. Thompson nodded in confirmation. Mrs. Wells is guaranteed lifetime right of residency as part of the inheritance transfer. You can stay too, Julian, but under my rules now. What? What kind of rules? His voice was small, defeated. Respect, basic decency. And you will never again suggest that anyone should go die in a gutter. I kept my tone even, without malice, the same courtesy I would have shown anyone. What if I apologize? Desperation was seeping into his voice. What if I take back everything I said? The legal violation has already occurred, Thompson explained. The transfer of the inheritance is irreversible under the terms of the will. I leaned forward, looking at the man who had tried to destroy me less than 48 hours earlier. Catherine knew this day would come. She protected us both. Both of us? Julian mumbled, his voice barely audible. Yes, you will have a roof over your head, and your dignity. So will I. The foundation provides living stipends for its residents. I gently straightened Catherine's photograph. My daughter was wiser than any of us ever imagined. I've lost everything, Julian whispered, broken, defeated. Everything I planned for, everything I dreamed of. You lost everything you tried to steal, I corrected him. There's a difference. Thompson was packing his documents away efficiently, every movement infused with professional satisfaction. I will file the transfer papers tomorrow. The foundation will take legal ownership by Friday. Catherine left me something more valuable than money, I said, adjusting my daughter's picture on the end table. Julian looked up. What is that supposed to mean? Justice, I replied, and the certainty that she truly loved me. My voice cracked just slightly. She told me in the hospital, Mom, I made sure you'd be taken care of. And I didn't understand what she meant then. Your daughter spent months setting up this protection, Thompson added. She anticipated exactly what might happen and built legal safeguards around you. As Thompson prepared to leave, I felt a deep sense of closure. Catherine's love had transcended death itself, reaching through legal documents to protect me when I needed it most. Julian, you can stay as long as you respect the rules of the house, I told him, as Thompson gathered his briefcase. Treat people with respect. Contribute peacefully to the household. Remember that this is a home, not a hotel. He nodded numbly. What other choice do I have? The same one you gave me 2 days ago. But I am not you. Thompson shook my hand at the door. Justice has been served, Eleanor. Catherine would be proud. As his car pulled away, I went back to the living room, where Julian sat staring silently at the wall. For the first time since Catherine's death, we were alone together as equals. Two people dependent on the same foundation, living under the same roof, bound by circumstances neither of us could change. We'll find a way to live together with respect, I told him. I'm sorry, he whispered. For what I said. For everything. Sorry is a start. It's respect that matters from now on. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 4 o'clock, marking time in a house that now belonged to neither of us, and yet to both of us. Catherine's final gift wasn't justice. It was the possibility of redemption, even for those who didn't deserve it. Outside, the Texas afternoon light streamed through the windows my late husband had chosen, illuminating the family photos that would remain on these walls long after Julian and I were gone. The Wells house would endure, protected by a love that reached beyond the grave. Some victories are worth the wait. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. And to hear the next story, click on the box that appears on your left.